Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Untouchables. So, I have to go on and say that this is a soft, great film, simply because this story has been covered to death. Uh, Probably writing off the success of this film, but still, this story has been told far too often, even though there is a lot more enjoyable stuff in here than there probably is anywhere else. You could probably go on and watch any show that has to do with time travel of sorts, or just time period stuff, and more than likely Capone's story will probably get covered. So, I would go on and say that, and a lot of people will argue with me, that, like, without Sean Connery's character, this movie is not as strong as it should be. Not saying like Sean Connery, I'm just saying Sean Connery's character, how he is to kind of give us so many like really good lines within this film, and is to also, this movie is to give us some shock moments, but then also is to give us some like cool like thoughts of certain characters. Like, I thought it was really interesting when Al Capone was kind of being around this table talking to his men, and he would just be like simply talking about baseball, and he had a bat in his hand, and he's going on and saying like, well, yeah, like, like the guy who is to be holding the bat having to swing and hopefully hitting a home run, and like there's an individual effort by that one person to kind of have everything work, but then there also is a team that's behind him that has to go on and catch the balls and pitch and all that stuff, and the guys are just like, yeah, and so, and then he goes on and smacks somebody in the head with a baseball bat, just starts beating them, and I'm like, oh my god, this movie's brutal. Man, there's some like surprising points in this film, but god, there's also some just good liners in this movie. So it's like, I would have to say it's a soft, great film. It's a little slow paced for me, and really you can go on and consistently be annoyed with Oscar Wallace, who's to be the accountant in this film, who is to like consistently go on and on and on about like, hey, we got to do something with this guy's taxes. We got to figure out a way to get tax evasion. We got to do that. Like, yeah, like we get it. Like, we know exactly where the story is eventually going to head. It's just going to take 2 hours almost to get to that point. Plus, also, everybody's to know where this story is to head anyways, but we have some fun moments in this film that is to eventually also make us realize this is based on a true story, and for us to have fun with this film, these were people's actual lives. There might be a descendant of sorts from any number of these people that still live, exist, breathe, whatever, and really that just came from all of this story. And so like, for me to probably just go on and say, yeah, this is a great film, this is also to be someone's life story. Whether it could be accurate or drastically inaccurate, I am not quite sure, but either way, it's still based on a true story. So yeah. So, teeing it up, what exactly is this movie about? It's currently available on HBO Max. It's a soft, great film. And so, teeing it up, we have it to where Elliot Ness is to be a detective for the Treasury, or the Treasury Bureau. And so Elliot Ness is to try to go on and try to figure out how to eventually arrest people who are selling alcohol, because at this point in time in the 1930s, alcohol was an illegal beverage of sorts. And so we had guys like Al Capone who were illegally bootlegging it. And so it seems by the end of this movie, they are to, of course, mention that they might pull back the fact that alcohol may turn around and not become illegal, but like uh, really before that, they're just kind of playing around with the fact that alcohol at that time period was illegal. And so we have it to where Elliot is to go into Chicago and try to find out who is to all be trying to bootleg this alcohol. And it seems that at first he's to fall flat on his face, but then it seems that Elliot is to try to find the right connection of people to then have him start to crack down on this alcohol and to find the right places to go to eventually stop all this from happening. And so this all eventually will lead to Al Capone and his arrest by the end of this film, after a number of people have been killed and a number of people are to also be desperately found and are to be connected to a trial where they're giving certain evidence that is to point to Al Capone and eventually force him to go to prison for tax evasion, because that's the story. Really, if you haven't heard that by now, because you probably should, then spoilers. But either way, it's not a massive surprise. But otherwise, yeah. So but also, like, one thing that they'll leave on. Honestly, without Malone in this film, you don't have much of a film. Luckily, I guess we had Malone, who is like the right guy, I guess, at the right time, and within the story. But like, also, like, everything that he is to kind of deliver in this movie, I thought was just like, man, like, he is pretty much better than anyone else in this film. Not saying that just like Sean Connery is to be better than anyone else in this film. Like, people could debate that and argue that, and that's what it is. But I just think that that character was the best thing for this movie, hands down. People could disagree. People could be like, oh no, like, having Al Capone or Robert De Niro in this movie was the best thing, or or having a number of other characters. Maybe you're thinking Oscar Wallace, weirdly, the accountant, who is to be this kind of goofy character that is to try and go on and fire guns. Maybe that was maybe the whole thing, maybe the whole story, the whole shebang was to have been the benefit of it all. I don't know. But anyways, let's go on into that double 5 time territory. Let's just go into spoilers, because it's about that time. Just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we can do spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this film, we are to have a cafe that it's a guy, have a guy behind a counter and some salesmen who are going over about green beer. And we have the guy behind the counter who is telling this salesman, it's like, well, hey, like I'm sorry, but I don't think I can go on and do any of this. Like, I don't think I can buy this green beer right now. And so the guy's like, well, hey, I don't care what your what you like think about the beer, as long as it's bought. And so we all of a sudden have this salesman walking away, realizing that this guy is to refuse wanting to buy this beer. And so all of a sudden this little girl comes in and is to realize that this guy had left his briefcase, and so the girl is to grab the briefcase, and all of a sudden this cafe that she's in freaking explodes. And I'm like, oh my god, that is a way to open up a film. That is for true. So all of a sudden, because of that happening, well, like that and a number of other things, we turn to Elliot Ness, who is to go on and become the Treasury Bureau guy, and is to go on and do investigation on uh, alcohol being sold illegally. And so we also have to go on and have Elliot Ness, who's being interviewed by a number of people, and then eventually he walks away. We also have Al Capone, who is being interviewed while getting a very close shave, so much so that he ends up getting cut while he used to talk to people about, like, hey, I don't know what any of this means. Like, I don't know what bootleg means. Like, I don't really know. Like, I never really understood any of that, and so on and so forth. And so we have both of that going on. So we have Elliot Ness that is to be shown a number of guys who had possibly at some point gone on and been on the force for a while. And so Elliot is to turn to all these these officers that are all wearing uniforms, because they're just like street police. They're like basically guys who would normally be like on the beat, like on the streets, kind of just patrolling and whatever. So Elliot Ness is telling all of the guys, like, well, hey, like, I get that probably any number of you at some point probably would have all had a drink or two. And so now that you're with me, you're working with me, you need to stop all that. And so everybody's just like, oh, all right. Like, this guy's on the up and up. So Elliot Ness is to go on and possibly try to do this raid with this snowplow and a number of these detectives. And he is to go on and say that I guess there is an informant inside this one warehouse that they're going to go into. And so, like, he's telling them, like, hey, make sure you don't go after the guy with the brown hat and the red scarf and then this and that. So while Elliot is to go on and go into this this vehicle and is to eat a portion of this sandwich and talk to one of the detectives who is to actually be Prasuski. We have a where Elliot Ness is to have gotten a or Elliot is to have gotten, I'll probably just call him Ness. Ness is to get some message from his wife saying that she's always proud of him, and so Ness is to talk to this officer about being married and everything like that. So Ness goes on and is to notice that there is some kind of prowler around. And so Ness is like, okay, like, what is that guy in the shadows? I need to see who he is. So all of a sudden, Ness is to go on and spot this guy and is to pull him to where he can see who he is. Come to find out, this is some random cameraman, possibly for the reporters or news or something like that. Like a random just guy with a camera. So, like one of those cameras that you kind of click and you can get a photo developed and whatever. Like, weirdly, I guess I have to explain that because this is 1930s, and so, anyways, pushing on. So after Ness is to find out about this camera guy, he is to then go on and take this snowplow and mention to all the officers, like, hey guys, we're going to go and do some good. And then he breaks into this warehouse, this factory, with supposedly him to be looking out for a bunch of maple leaf boxes, which I'm like, okay, like, why is it that that has to be like that specifically? It just seemed very odd. So all of a sudden we have them break into this place and they go on and find these boxes with the red maple leaves on it. And so Ness is to tell this cameraman to take this picture, and so Ness is to break into this maple leaf box to find out that there is not alcohol in there, that there is really just some Asian umbrella within there. So Ness is to go on and realize that he had made a massive mistake, and we have it to where this cameraman is to be taking the brunt of all this. So like, ha ha ha, like, yeah, this guy's caught with his pants down a little bit. So we have Ness, who is just a little upset by the fact that he is to fail here. So he goes on and he turns around and he's over by this overpass or this bridge or somewhere close by. And so all of a sudden that's where he first ends up meeting with Malone. And so Malone is just kind of walking and making his way to bump into Ness. And so all of a sudden we have it to where, of course, Ness is to throw this thing of paper, and Malone is to be upset for the fact that this guy was basically littering. So all of a sudden Malone and Ness are starting to talk, and Malone is to all of a sudden notice that Ness is to have a gun. And so Malone is asking Ness, like, okay, who are you? Why do you have a gun? And Ness is like, well, I work for the Treasury Department. And Malone is like, oh, okay. So he just starts walking off. And Ness is like, wait a minute. Like, how is it that you just bought my story of me being in the Treasury Department? And Malone is just like, well, like, no one would have made that up. So, like, I believed you. So Malone walks away and Ness is like, that guy! Like, who is this guy? Like, what badge number is he? I need to know who this guy is. Like, I need to, like, I need to know where I need him at some point. Like, there's something about him. Like, he's experienced, or it just seems like he knows something. So eventually Ness is to go on and is to hire Malone to work with Ness. And Ness is to go on and specifically find where Malone lives, and then is to have Malone get interested in what Ness is trying to do. So Malone is to take Ness out of the office to then talk to him about what they're going to do. And here's when we end up getting the spot where Malone is mentioning about, like, well, hey, if they have a knife, we have a gun. If they put somebody in the hospital, we'll put them in the morgue. Like, we have to go on, and there is a escalation of everything. And that's just the Chicago way. the Chicago way. So that whole line delivery is, like, really cool. And immediately that was to, like, also just weirdly give me, like, a Godfather's moment also, where we go on and we have, like, some of these moments in here just kind of feel like Godfather-like moments to me, where it's like, I'm going to give you an offer you can't refuse, and so on and so forth. So Ness is working with Malone, and all of a sudden we also have it to where Oscar Wallace, who is to be this accountant, is to immediately go on and work with Ness. And so it seems that they need to go on and they need to recruit other people. And that's when they end up getting a guy who is to go by the name George Stone, but that's not actually his birth given name. So, because both Malone and Ness are looking for another guy, but Malone wants Ness to look for guys, like, right out of the like right out of the academy, like right out of like guys who aren't as experienced, so that way they can go on and just have a fresh face. So Malone starts asking certain guys questions and is to see if any of them are married. And Ness is like, yeah, I don't want any of them to be married. So we have Malone, who is to pick out eventually George Stone. And so George Stone comes off as a guy that doesn't take lip from anybody or crap from anybody. And that's the one thing that both Malone and Ness like about him. And that's immediately like, dude, this guy's hired. So we go on to have the four of these guys, even the accountant, is to pitch in because Malone is to go on a raid. It seems that Malone is getting some information from a reliable source of what things are going on. Come to find out, I would assume that that actual source that Malone is actually getting is coming from Mike, the guy who is to go on and be like the head of this kind of police department, is getting certain messages and stuff like that out. So we have it to where Malone is to go on this raid, and it's to lead them to some maintenance room to where they come and find out that there is a whole hideaway place where there is a number of alcoholic things that are being manufactured out. And so we have it to where Malone and all these guys are going on and arresting everybody. We even have the accountant who is forced to now be holding a shotgun to arrest everyone. So after that, of course, is to happen, we then have Al Capone, who is to go to everybody but the whole baseball speech, and he is to then go and beat someone to death with a baseball bat. So, which I thought was like, oh my god, in this movie, like just like the two shocking moments is the girl with the briefcase and then the guy getting beaten to death with a baseball bat. I was like, man, this is pretty good. So so eventually after that first raid, it seems that now Ness is to no longer have egg on his face, because when he was to go into the office, and it seems that they had kind of stuck that that newspaper of him failing, and Elliot was to take this one article and was to go on, put it on his wall and be like, yeah, look at that. Like, I'm going to take this as like, yeah, so what? I messed up here, but eventually I'll go on and I'll fix it. Things are going to get better. And everybody's like, okay, like, I guess he's going to be driven by this now. So we eventually go on and have Ness, who is to make his way back home after a long day. And at some point, it seems that Ness, his life is to start to get threatened, because Ness at some point was to get a payout, and Ness was to take this guy with this envelope and kind of smack him around a little bit, because he's like, no, I'm not going to take a payout from you. Like, I will not be bought. So since you can't go on and bribe this guy, we then have to turn around and threaten him. So Ness is to go home one night to eventually have his child have a birthday party. And so all of a sudden we have a guy named Nitty who is to be by this guy's house. And so Nitty is going on to Ness and talking about his wife and his daughter, and that they may be in danger. And so we go on and have Ness, who's realized, like, oh my god, like, this guy is basically threatening me and threatening my family. And so Ness is to go on and take his family and have them be driven away by some officer that is to go on and kind of have a hat and an overcoat so you can't really tell it's an officer. All of a sudden, Malone and the rest of the guys are coming along, and so now that we have it to where it seems that Ness's wife is to be very safe, uh, we also have at some point in this movie uh, Ness's wife is pregnant and then she has a child that at some point Elliot is to want to call this kid J. Edgar Hoover or Jack Edgar. And so eventually they go with like Jack James or something like that within the name of the child. It doesn't really matter. So we go on into this story, and so eventually this is to push to having Ness and Malone and all these guys trying to avoid things coming across from the border, from the Canadian border. And so they end up getting a bunch of like Mounties or freaking God, what is the Mountie captain? They end up getting the Mounties to help them try to stop a number of guys trying to go on and have this stuff go across the border. So we go on and have these guys kind of staking it out, waiting for at some point these people to come across this bridge with these vehicles. So we go on and eventually have these people come, and so we have all these guys by horseback going on and preventing these guys from crossing this bridge. And so a lot of them either get shot up or end up getting arrested. So we all of a sudden have a guy named George who is to possibly be the only guy who can possibly give these people information, because he is to have a ledger that is to go on and have a number of payouts within this ledger. So we have the whole entire time where Oscar is to like immediately just be saying like, man, this guy is getting a lot of payouts from somewhere, but it seems like he doesn't legitimately own these businesses, but he's somehow getting a payout of sorts, and we should try to get him for some kind of tax like tax evasion or tax thing of some kind of sorts. And so to the point while they're going on this airplane making their way to Canada, Oscar is going on and on to Ness about the whole tax evasion thing. And Ness is like, well, that's great and all. Like, go on and keep like fiddling around with the numbers and whatever. So now we have George with this ledger, and so we have a number of people who have had to now like kill to protect themselves. We had it to where at one point Ness was to kill this Italian man, and so we go on and have it where now Malone is to try to strike fear into George to give up this information about this whole ledger. And so Malone is to grab a guy that is already dead, pick him up, and then shoot him through the mouth, pretending that this guy is still alive and he's going to give up some kind of information. And so when he doesn't, eventually this guy will go on and murder Malone, threatening George's life, also thinking like, oh my god, he's going to do that to me next. So George ends up giving up this whole bit of information, and so now they're off to the races, thinking like, hey, like now we've gone on and done this, and so now we have a guy that's gonna like squeal on Capone, and everything's gonna work out. Well, come to find out, when we actually have George, who is to be taken somewhere with both Oscar, it seems that we have Nitty, who's disguised as some police officer, and within this elevator we have both George and we have both Oscar that is to be killed. And so these guys, of course, were to be called the Untouchables. And so in the elevator, we have Nitty, who is to describe these people as touchable, showcasing that it's like, hey, I got to these men, ha ha ha, sucks to be you. So we have it to where Malone is to lift up Oscar and to take him down into the elevator, and or take him like down to the ground of the elevator. And so we have it to where now like the best bet for Malone and Ness and George, now who is to be the only one left, George Stone, is to have slipped through their fingers, sadly enough. So we now have it to where these guys have to go on and figure out a way to get a new, like, guy who is to know how this ledger works. They need to figure out a way to go on and find another person who is to have this kind of information here. So we also had a moment where, when the four of them were still all alive, that they were told to go on and have dinner together. And that's, of course, when the cameraman was to clip a picture of all four of them together, not to release out into the newspaper, but as like for a personal thing. So, and while Malone is to kind of tell us why he has this kind of weird chain with this key and this thing that is to be connected to St. Jude, which, of course, if a lot of people know, St. Jude is actually a charity for like underdeveloped children and stuff like that, like infants, and like it's a whole charity about that. Which I remember, of course, doing some charity work or some charity things when eventually I would work in retail. Like, we'd always have to go on and ask people about, like, well, hey, do you want to donate to this and donate to that? Because there's always some kind of charity that they would try to go on and just tie into every retail store. That's always the thing. So, with that said, and more than likely, for what I probably just said about St. Jude, the charity, I probably am not exactly correct. You can go on and search it for yourself and figure out what all that was about. But anyways, but it has to do with like infants and so on and so forth. Moving on, this is taking too much time for that. So we go on, and plus also they said like St. Jude's is a thing for policemen. I'm like, okay, whatever. So again, too long. So now we fast track, and so Oscar is dead in this story, and so now they're looking for the next guy who can go on and be the possible bookkeeper of information. And not quite sure if I've really heavily fast-tracked all this movie, but I kind of want to quickly go over this movie, because probably people have seen this movie a number of times or whichever. Plus, I'm kind of picking and choosing certain things to kind of quickly go through also. And probably a lot of the Capone stuff will probably be lost by me, because story, things, what has to be the most important. So we have, of course, where there is to possibly be a new bookkeeper, but Malone has to go and speak with Mike to try and get this information. And because he is the guy who is kind of being their like insider who's kind of telling them what's going on, and Malone is getting that information. So it seems that Malone and Mike are having a falling out right now, where it seems that both of them are going to even go into a fight. And eventually, when both of them are kind of talking, and uh, we have it to where eventually the talk between the two of them is to lead to Malone getting the information about the new bookkeeper that they can try to get information out of. So we, of course, have Malone, who is calling George and telling George that he is to have this information for this other bookkeeper, and that Ness needs to meet Malone at his place so that way he can give him this information. So while Malone is to be at his place, he all of a sudden is to have a guy that he calls Wop make his way into his place with a knife. And Malone is to go on and tell this Wop of sorts, like, hey, you brought a knife to a gunfight and you're going to lose. So this guy continues to back away, and as Malone is to make it to the outside of his place, he is to realize that the assassin guy, Nitty, again is to be outside with this gun to blast a number of bullets into Malone, and then have him fall over and have him kind of crawl his way to hopefully like try and save himself. So Ness is to go on and is to make it to Malone's place, and all of a sudden we luckily have it where Ness is there just as Malone is about to die, going on and having Malone tell Ness about this paper that is to have this certain train schedule, and that the bookkeeper will be here by 12:05. So while that's going on, we also have Al Capone, who's going to the opera. Not quite sure exactly what play he's going on and seeing, but it, I guess, has something to do with a clown. Really, I would probably go on and maybe say that this is Pagliacci, but I'm not quite sure. I don't want to make that judgment and be incorrect. Immediately, the only reason why I know about Pagliacci is really just because of The Watchmen for some reason. So, with that said, so we go into this story, and so we have, of course, where while Capone is going on to his opera to go and see this theater being taken place, we eventually have Nitty, who is to tell Al Capone about what is going on. So, fast track. So, Ness and George are to make their way to this, I'm assuming, this station of this like train station of sorts, to eventually wait for this bookkeeper to arrive. And so we inconveniently have it to where Ness is kind of hiding away his shotgun to just kind of wait for eventually him having to kill a number of thugs. And so, while the inconvenient part is to all of a sudden have it to where at the exact same time that eventually these this bookkeeper and these thugs are to eventually show up, we have a woman who is to have a child in this carriage, and so Elliot is to go on and try to help this woman with her carriage get up these flights of stairs. And while he is trying to help her with this baby, he all of a sudden is to realize that these guys are to be Capone's men and they're going to want to kill him. So we have it to where Ness is to shoot one of the men, and then all of a sudden the baby carriage starts to go and starts to clunk down these stairs. And so Ness is not only having to be in a gunfight with all these Capone men, but then he's also desperately going after this baby carriage, as we have George, who's to also make his way there and start to shoot some of these men, and is to luckily slide perfectly to where this baby carriage can now stop, and Ness can go on and take down the rest of these men, while we also have one of the Capone men who is kind of holding on to this bookkeeper, threatening to kill him. So we have it to where George is to have his sights on this guy, and Elliot is to let George kill him. So I feel like there's so much about this movie that I didn't cover. I feel like I've quickly rushed through this movie, and there's a billion things that I should have gone on and said and didn't. But that's the whole thing of just rushing through a review. But also dialogue about me usually gets quickly missed a lot. So there could be a billion different really good lines here, and I'm going on and I'm not covering any of them. So it is what it is with this review. So we are to have Ness, who is to now have this bookkeeper, and he's willing to squeal upon Capone. And speaking of squealing, like a pig, we have this whole court thing where Capone is to be arrested for tax evasion. And so we have this bookkeeper who is going on and rattling off all the information from this ledger. And so we all of a sudden have Ness, who is leaving the courtroom, to eventually bump into Nitty, who is to all of a sudden have this one match little book thing that is to have the address of Malone, making Ness realize that, oh my god, Nitty was to be the guy who is to have assassinated Malone, and I'm going to now have to chase after him. So Ness is to go and chase after this guy onto the rooftop, and so as it seems that Ness is to get dropped off this roof of this building, but instead he just falls onto this one little piece of this building and is to try and shoot Nitty. When Ness is to get back onto the roof, we have Nitty, who is to go on and try to scramble away from Ness, and he ends up trying to go on and swing from this rope to try to get down off this building, but it seems that Nitty, wherever he goes, he's having problems trying to get off of this building, so he is just stuck right back to where Ness already is, and Nitty's like, okay, arrest me, I'll beat the rap, but arrest me. So Ness is to go on and be tempted to arrest Nitty, but then Nitty is to go on and mention how Malone was to squeal like a pig when he died. And so Ness is to go on and be like, okay, this has gone too far. So Ness decides that he is going to just push Nitty off this roof. and is to now ask him if Malone was to squeal like that when he died. Did it sound just like that? So Nitty is to fall onto this car and fall to his death. So we also had a moment where they're talking about this ledger and how there's certain names on it. And Ness is to mention that the one guy that they are talking about is the one guy who is already dead. So we go on and we have it to where at the end of all this, like that whole bookkeeper was to really just seal the deal on Capone, having it to where even in this trial, we come to find out that the jury had been bought by Capone, and so we have it to where Ness is to try to now manipulate the judge to then get them a different jury, because Ness is to mention that this judge was also to be in this ledger somewhere, and that this judge needs to go on and do what he wants, which is to give them a brand new jury from some other trial, and is to try to like do this the right way. So after they go on and adjust the jury, we now have Capone's lawyer that is mentioning like, well, hey, like Capone is to no longer plea for a non-guilty thing. He's to go on and just be guilty now. And so Capone is upset with his lawyer. But not only that, he is to just kind of be like grabbed and like forced away from him going on and hurting people. And we have Ness, who is to of course go on and rub it in Capone's face, and is basically tell him about like the fight is all done, like the Capone is over, and that that is the end of this this education. Kind of like how Malone was to go on and be schooling Ness at some point. So as Malone was to go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like that's the best part about the job is when you're to go home alive. So as well as a number of hundred of other lines and stuff that was kind of delivered in this movie. So surprisingly, yeah, an hour and 59 minute movie, and I hopefully was able to go on and rattle off most of this film. There was probably a billion things that I probably forgot about because that's what happens when I go on and review a movie. Really, like, this movie is so, it's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and it's also a true story. So it's kind of like a cluster of just fascinating things. So with that said, I think I'm going to fascinate myself out of here. After the trial was over, we had a moment between both Ness and George Stone, where we had Ness, who was still to have Malone's little trinket, little piece of the whole key and the chain and Ness ends up handing that off to George because Malone would have wanted a cop to have that instead of him having that. And so, like, besides the one moment where Ness was to go home and eventually to go and sleep with his wife after reading a book to his daughter and so on and so forth. Like, yeah, there's not really much else I think that there is left to be covered within this film. Other than, yeah, like the whole moment when Ness was to be with his wife in the early stages of this movie, going off to go to work. Yeah, I think everything is covered. So, with that said, let me know in the comments below if there's a billion things that I forgot about, because I'm sure there is. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about the Untouchables, whether you liked this movie, hated this movie, or at the end of the day were to be indifferent about this film. because maybe you too are to be a person that has had this story been told far too often, and eventually it just loses its value over time or whatever. But anyways, so with that said, I think I'm just gonna get out of here, go on and do another uh, either review or just call it a night and just get my rest. Either way, I'm gonna say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.